When you got a show like The Last of Us that's based on an incredibly popular game, creators have to be careful about how much they change the original content. But that doesn't mean they didn't make some creative choices. For starters, a new timeline in the PlayStation game, the modern apocalypse is caused by a fungal pandemic that starts in the present day, or 2013, the year the game came out. The bulk of the story takes place 20 years later in 2033. When traumatized survivor Joel and his surrogate daughter Ellie travel all over the country, the show takes a very different approach. It started in 2003, and most of the story takes place in 2023, which is the year we live in now. As a result, the show's rooted in the here and now, making it feel as urgent and terrible as the actual pandemic we're presently experiencing. HBO's The Last of Us isn't science fiction in the traditional sense, but rather follows a timeline in which the virus started in Indonesian crops rather than China. Mazin told Insider that he was the one who suggested changing the timeline because it makes it seem possible. He said that he has this thing where if he's watching a show that takes place 20 years from now, it seems less real. Can't argue with that. He also said that it's not too far-fetched to imagine fascist police state-style rule in post-9/11 America. If the outbreak of the virus, FEDRA, the Federal Disaster Response Agency, becomes an authoritarian military state in both the game and the program. This is something that the fans could overlook as it doesn't affect the story all that much. But this next change had fans pretty disappointed, switching out spores for tendrils. Fans weren't too happy when they found out that the HBO characters wouldn't be carrying gas masks to protect themselves against clouds of fungal spores. The spores add a lot of intrigue to the game, plus they're based on reality. Real-world fungi, like its fictional counterparts, use spores to disperse themselves over enormous areas. To avoid having their cast members perform lengthy scenes while wearing gas masks, directors Mazin and Druckmann decided to use tendrils instead.
Cordyceps did spread by spores. In reality, I think everybody would be infected within a few hours. It's just, we can't run away from air. So we wanted to come up with a different vector of infection, a different way that the infection passed through.
Together, these fungal wires form a kind of hive mind among the languishing creatures. If one tendril is touched, others nearby will feel it and respond, allowing them to spread the tendrils from body to body, even through a kiss of death. The reasoning behind this decision is deeper than simply set logistics. There was always some doubt about the spore mechanisms in the PlayStation game. For example, why were the spores so easily limited to specific areas? Forget about gas masks. Wouldn't they have glued themselves to skin and clothing anyway? Even if we assume that the number of spores in the open air isn't large enough to turn an unwary victim, wouldn't Joel and Ellie run into more of them? Still, Mazin isn't completely dismissing spores. In January, he told the Washington Post that we might still find spores, and it's not that they can't exist in this world. That being the case, I'll reserve judgment until I see spores and tendrils actually clash on screen. But there's one difference that fans actually welcomed, and that was Sarah's introduction. The game throws us headfirst into the middle of the action. Sarah, Joel's preteen daughter, is first seen on the evening of the pandemic, because the crisis had already begun. We only see the depth of emotion between the duo in only a few scenes before Sarah's heartbreaking death. The show gives us a lot more time to understand their dynamic. Joel and Sarah are seen skipping pancakes at the breakfast table. Sarah's been taking notes in class while being almost distracted by a twitching classmate, and she's also seen opening her father's birthday present, a watch he will wear for the next 2 decades, even after the face has been shattered. Finally, in one of the most terrifying and horrific early battles on the show, Sarah confronts her infected next-door neighbor. In the end, these extra scenes give the next sequence, which is almost a frame-for-frame copy of the PlayStation game, more oomph. Mazin and Druckmann didn't have to make any adjustments to Sarah's backstory, and they didn't change the most crucial element, the sudden and terrible nature of her death. But they added just enough to make it hurt that much more. While the creators stayed true to how Sarah died in the game, they almost completely changed how this character died. Tess's unnecessary violation before she dies after Fedra agents shoot her with a gun. when they catch her sneaking into the Boston Capitol building with Joel and Ellie. She doesn't just get hurt by accident. On the contrary, she puts herself in the line of fire on purpose, so that her would-be lover and the would-be cure for all of humanity can get away without being seen. And this happens right after she tells Joel and Ellie about the zombie bite on her collarbone. She insists that it's already over for her, but won't let the fungus control her. She will die on her own terms so that a possible cure can be found. While Anna Torv's Tess suffers the same fate in the TV show, her death has more subtlety and, depending on your perspective, more or less impactful. The infected, not Fedra agents, invade the Capitol after Joel mistakenly alerts them to their location, and Tess swears to keep them at bay. While Joel and Ellie run for their lives, Tess drops oil barrels and hand grenades on the ground, ready to light them on fire. But just as she's about to light the match, her stalker walks in, quietly approaches her, and engages in a vile makeout session. Ew. When the mycelium tendrils in his throat slide down hers, she finally lets go of the lighter. Joel and Ellie watch helplessly as the Capitol building explodes. But unlike the change in her story, fans actually like the show version of these two characters. Bill and Frank were far from being a footnote in the show like they were in the game. When Joel and Ellie first meet Bill, they're in need of transportation and find him outside of Boston. After mowing down waves of infected, he finally agrees to help them out, and they find temporary refuge in a deserted house. There, they find a dead body hanging from the ceiling, which Bill immediately recognizes as that of his ex-lover Frank. Even as he yells, "Well, Bill's grief is clear. As heartbreaking as the scene is, it pales in comparison to the many other moments of the game. And so, the show made an adjustment, a vital one. To ensure that Bill and Frank would be more than simply a footnote in The Last of Us canon, in the show, an entire episode is dedicated to their unexpected romance, including their jokes, lovemaking, and fights, as well as how they run the self-sustaining farm that supplies Tess, Joel, and others in Boston with supplies. We see them grow up together over not just hours, but years. And while it's true that we don't get to experience all of Ellie and Bill's wonderful witty dialogue, but instead of a temporary sign of hopelessness and futility, we get a loud message of strength. Bill wrote to Joel that he used to loathe the world and was glad when everyone died. But he was mistaken, as there was one life worth fighting for. He said men like Joel and him are needed because of this. They have a job to do, and God help anyone who gets in their way. That's all I have. See you in the next video.